Hello there, and welcome to part 2 of Beginner's Guide. Well, it's time to start painting. But before I get into that, I think I should talk a little about the types of paints out there. Understanding basics about paints was one of the most confusing aspects of starting modeling for me. So let me share my 2 pennies worth. Let me give you a quick idea about the 2 types of paint you are going to come across most commonly. Let's start with this paint tub we got with the kit. It's a small Revell paint container. Revell paints are acrylic paints. That basically means that these are water-based paints and water-soluble. Some of the most popular paints are acrylic, like this Tamiya paint. Here's another example of a water-based paint. Mk.V. Excellent paints for the airbrush. And then there is Vallejo. Vallejo Air is specifically made for airbrushes, though you can use it with a paintbrush too. And this is Vallejo's model color, meant to be used with a brush. Now let's take a look at oil-based paints. This Mr. Color paint is oil-based. This small bottle of Academy paint is also oil-based. So, which type of paint shall we use? Well, the modeling community is divided on that one. Some modelers prefer acrylic, while others oil-based. As for my personal experience, I have used both and found that I could get good results with either. So I guess it will eventually come down to a personal choice. But a point worth noting is that manufacturers and online sellers almost never ship oil-based paints. Also, you can thin down acrylic paints with water or with isopropyl alcohol, which is also called isopropanol. I made this thinner using 30% isopropanol and 70% water, and it works just fine. But if you are the lazy types, you can get ready-made branded acrylic thinners as well. To thin down oil paints, I use a general purpose thinner, which I get from my hardware store. Now, a word of caution while using oil paints, particularly when you spray them. Oil paints are dangerous, so you must have good ventilation while using them. You must also wear a protective mask. You must take this seriously. Health comes first. Okay, but what if you don't have any of these right now? No worries. Just use this paint that came with the kit. Or you can use acrylic paints you get in your local hobby store, or even oil paints. A few of my modeler friends use these paints with excellent results. But of course, ready-made paints are much more convenient to use. Right then, enough with the lesson. Let's get on with airbrushing this kit. I will start off by painting the cockpit parts black. Shake the jar to mix the paint. I pour in some homemade thinner. Do notice that I am using a piece of drinking straw to pour and mix the paint. I prefer using these straws as they are cheap and disposable. I am painting the cockpit black so that subsequent paint layers have a natural shadow effect. Not surprisingly, this application of a black paint is often called shadow painting. Well, let's go. To paint the cockpit, I will be using Mk.V's Zinc Chrome Interior Green. This is a new color I have just purchased. and I'm giving it a crack. In case you don't have a special color, just use the dark green that you got with the kit. For best control and results while airbrushing, you must apply thin, light layers. Don't put down a huge layer of interior green, or you will not only dirty up the entire cockpit, but also bury all the black shadow paint. I will also paint the wheel wells with the interior green paint. Once the green is dry, I take a fine brush and paint the interior details. Starting with this black for what I think is some sort of a radio box behind the cockpit seat. Next, I paint the seat cushion brown. Time for our first decal of the build. This one goes onto the cockpit instrument panel. While the decal sits in water, let me introduce you to some decal fixers and softeners. This is Microset. You use this to glue the decal in place. And this is Microsol. Microsol softens the decal and allows it to conform to the surface detail. I would recommend that a decal softener be among the first things you buy. There are other softeners available as well. This is Tamiya's Mark Fit, and this is Mr. Mark Softener. All of these perform the same function, which is to soften the decal. You can get these online. They are a little on the expensive side, but they last a long time. This bottle has been used for over a dozen kits, and I have barely made a dent in it. Anyway, moving on. I take the decal out of the water and slide it in place. Next, I apply some Microsol and leave it. Eventually, the decal will conform. I may have to dab a little more Microsol later on. Just don't touch the decal while it's drying. It may wrinkle, but that's part of the process. Just don't touch it, as it tears easily once the Microsol has started reacting with it. I have painted in all the details inside the cockpit, including the seat. I have also painted on the harness. It's all ready to be put together. But before I do that, I need to protect all this paintwork, and the way to do that is by applying a varnish. To do this, I will be using this Winsor & Newton Artist's Gloss Varnish. By the way, there is one product you will hear a lot about when it comes to modeling, and that is this Pledge Floor Wax, also known as Future. It's the same product but branded differently. It's a floor polish, but a large number of modelers use it as a clear gloss varnish. I use it as well. It gives a very good glass-like finish and is ideal to apply decals on or for weathering. There are also several specialized products like this Tamiya XF22 Clear. But I will use this Winsor & Newton varnish as it is easily available on the net as well as most well-stocked craft stores. You can also use any other brand of varnish just as long as it's clear. And to thin this varnish down, I will use Artist's White Spirit, once again by Winsor & Newton. Once the pledge is dry, I put the cockpit together, dry fitting and then gluing pieces in place. I dry fit the fuselage halves to see how the fit is. It's pretty good, not great, but we will improve on the seams and joints later. For now, let's just put the two halves together. Okay, we start by gluing the rear halves of the fuselage together. I do this with the Revell glue. Now, I use some tape to hold the two halves together while the glue sets in. I will use this opportunity to show you how Tamiya Extra Thin works. I will first align the front end of the fuselage together and then tape them together. Once I am satisfied that the parts are in place, I simply apply the Tamiya Extra Thin along the seams. Tamiya works on capillary action. The glue seeps into the crack and sets it in place. Just don't apply any glue near the tape, or it will run along the tape and ruin the surface details. And now, the same process for the wings. But first I need to clean up the pieces with my knife. Please don't forget, there are some fiddly bits that are to be glued onto the wings before they go together. And finally, the fuselage and the wings are glued in place. I have painted the floor of the wings black in case it shows through the cockpit. Well, that's it. All done. Looks good. Next time, we will clean up the seams with some putty and sanding, mask the canopy and paint the plane. Well, that's all for now. See you soon.